please understand that the science is never settled. My guest is an expert on that topic, that the science is never settled. And the way we win this fight for freedom is for humanity to unite in non-compliance. Thanks for listening to TNT Radio. Spread the word for TNT Radio, because this is the station where you will hear truth. This is the station where you will find hosts willing to fight for your freedom. All right, John Droz Jr. Delighted to have John on the show. He received his undergraduate degrees in physics and mathematics from Boston College, a graduate degree in physics from Syracuse University, and has been a Mensa member. He worked for GE Aerospace Electronics, Mohawk Data Sciences, and Monolithic Memories. After retiring at age 34, and I'm going to ask John what he means by that, he focused on educating citizens about technical issues ranging from climate to COVID and energy to education. John's underlying concern is that these policies should be based on genuine science, but instead they're often about political science, which guarantees inferior results. John's been a guest speaker on dozens of radio and TV shows, lectured all around America, and has published hundreds of articles and reports. He's on the North Carolina Oil and Gas Commission, is a member of the CO2 Coalition, the National Association of Scholars, and was the U.S. ambassador for the Global Climate Intelligence Group. He's the founder of Alliance for Wise Energy Decisions, an international coalition promoting science-based climate and energy policies. His website, wiseenergy.org, focuses on wind energy and solar, with the unusual emphasis of showing you, as a citizen, how to defend your rights. John publishes the free Media Balance newsletter twice a month, and I've been a long-time subscriber since I met John some 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago to be precise, and it covers a wide range of topics not adequately addressed by the mainstream media. Readership is over 10,000 worldwide. In late 2020, John was asked if he'd put together a team of independent experts to analyse election data. He agreed to do that, and they've generated 10 major reports. He's been very active in this space for 2 years. Consistent with his focus on genuine science, John also created a webpage on COVID-19, and I go to this website often. It's C19, as in C19, science.info, where his multiple COVID reports, videos are posted. And John now posts weekly to his Substack space on critical thinking. And John is indeed a critical thinker. I hope, John, you're not going to be critical of me. Welcome to the show. I'm delighted to have you here at last.
Thank you, Charles. So let me start off by being critical. One thing you said about masks here, I would take issue with. I believe your statement was that having a mask has no impact. And the fact is, wearing masks has a negative impact. There's numerous studies that have shown that wearing a mask is unhealthy for you. So wearing a mask is not a neutral thing that's useless. It's actually a negative thing.
Thank you. Yes, very well picked up. Thank you for listening. Now, John, you genuinely are a superstar. We can talk about so many things, but I really want you to start by talking about a very important legal case that you've been following. And would you please unpack that in relation to the FDA? Like, I read your summary of it. I'm horrified by what the FDA is proposing.
Okay, could I back up and give a little more general things first before we get into that? Do you mind?
You sure can. Absolutely.
Okay, I retired at 34, as I said. We can discuss that some other time. It's very interesting. But retired means I was no longer formally employed by a corporation like General Electric, so I was completely on my own. So I've been non-employed since I was 34. So I'm now 77, so over 40 years. So I decided to do with my time here, being a Christian person, I felt that someday we're all going to have an accounting for our life, and I had a lot of interest, like playing golf, for instance. So the question is that when I go to cash my chips in and I'm asked by the big guy for an accounting, will an answer like, well, I'm a one handicapper in golf, will that be a good answer? That's the question. So in my view, probably not. So I decided that I think what he's going to be looking for is he's given us certain opportunities and talents, and how well we've utilized those opportunities and talents. So I've been given the ability of being a scientist. And so it seems to me that there's an overwhelming need for competent scientists to help the public understand technical issues, because by and large, the public is politely categorized as being technically challenged. So what happens is that people make statements about wind energy, about climate, about COVID, whatever, and they make false scientific statements, technical statements, because they know the public is uninformed and they can get away with it. And then the few people that do object, out of the 95+%, and the remaining 5%, they are immediately characterized as, outliers, deniers, fill in the blank there. So that's sort of the general strategy that's been implemented over and over in a variety of technical matters. And the more I see this, the more disturbing this is, because our society is based on technology, and we are corroding our technical foundation here in every way. So, for instance, you mentioned my Substack. This is a free Substack. It's critical thinking on select societal issues. And I write once a week, typically. So about 3 weeks ago, I wrote an article that relates to some of the prior comments you made there about specifics. What's going to happen when the grid goes down? Well, most people are just clueless of what's going to happen when the grid goes down. So I try to put it in a polite layman understanding here. But the bottom line is, let's say if the grid or some major grids, the U.S. is comprised of like 5 grids, but if one of them goes down, the others are going to go down ultimately here. There's no way that one could go down and the others could keep going here normally. So if that happens, the short answer, which I explain in more detail on that commentary, the short answer is that the United States will revert to being a third world company within a matter of a couple of weeks.
Third world country.
Yes. Third world country within a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
The results will be beyond comprehension of what people have any reality about it. If they could see what the consequences are, and then they say, well, that's not going to happen. Well, that's just not so, because this injection of unreliable energy to such a degree here, wind energy, for instance, is guaranteed to make this happen.
Well, John, hold that thought, because the same thing's going to happen in Australia. We've got to go to a break, but we've got our energy minister, John, making these ridiculous assertions that wind and solar and renewables will replace baseload energy. It's a lie. It deludes people. And US and Australia, that's why we're so joined at the hip for similar thinking. We've got to go to a short break. We'll be back after these messages. My guest is John Droz Jr. That's spelled D-R-O-Z, as we say in Australia. And he's also, as you can see from D-R-O-Z, he's Dr. Oz. And I'm Charles Covest. This is the Mind Medicine program. We'll be back after these messages.
This is Mind Medicine on today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Thanks for being here with us on TNT Radio. My guest is John Droz Jr. from North Carolina, a wonderful man, a genius in my opinion. I hope you agree with me. And we were talking about the collapse of American society if the electricity grid breaks down, as it will if these policies of politicians continue, as it will in Australia. So, John, please continue.
So I'm trying to give an overview here why I spent my time in trying to educate citizens about technical matters. There's two fundamentals here. One fundamental is that the question is, what is science? Science is something that, by and large, every survey that's been made is strongly supported by the public. But the irony is that if you ask the typical citizen to define science, they aren't able to do it. So we have a dichotomy here, and the bad actors are taking advantage of this. They know that science is supported, They know that the public doesn't understand what science is. So they get up, people like Mr. F, we'll say, in America, Dr. F, and say, what I'm saying is science, and it's a total lie. But the average person says, okay, that's a good thing. If he's speaking for science, I'm in favor of that. But they don't realize that what they're being told is not true. So I spent a lot of time trying to educate people about what science is and isn't. And ultimately, what the end effect of these unscientific policies is that technical policies I'm talking about, this particular subcategory of policies, is that they should be based on science. So in other words, our electricity policy should be based on real science. That would make sense. But they aren't. So what's happening is that what's replaced real science is political science. Well, they shouldn't have even used that term. That's more deception. There's no political science. It's politics, really. So what's replacing science is politics. But they call it political science because they make these things sound better than they are. So the fact that our technical policies are based on politics is extraordinarily disconcerting, and it's guaranteed to be severely problematic, and it is already in a lot of ways. So one step back here, I'm a person who looks at big picture and say, how is this? How are citizens allowing this to happen? Why are these people having such undue influence here and corrupting our country? And in my view here now, after fritzing around on this in some over 4 decades, is our education system. And particularly the undergraduate system, which is in the United States K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade, high school. So if you look at what's going on there are several things that are extraordinarily bad, and they would be the subject of a whole program. But to keep it brief here, in my view, the number one objective for our education program should be, whether it's Australia or US, should be to produce graduates that have the ability and the interest to be critical thinkers.
Just stop there. So that's the crucial point. The purpose of education is to produce people who could be critical thinkers.
Right.
Good.
They have the interest. They have the interest in doing it. In other words, they want to be a critical thinker, and they have the ability to do it. Critical thinkers. But and as a matter of fact, here I hear from educators all the time complaints saying things like, "Well, hey, we're in an impossible situation here. We have kids in our class here in high school, whatever, that are going to be in jobs that aren't even created yet. How do we deal with that?" And I said, well, you deal with that very easily. And that is, if these people come out of their school here being critical thinkers, they will be able to adapt to any job. On the other hand, if you're trying to train them to do some mechanical thing, well, yes, that may not very well be applicable. But if they are critical thinkers, they will be adaptable to anything. Oh, never thought of that. Okay. But so if you look at what's going on in the topic, of all the topics there are in school, that is the most appropriate for teaching critical thinking is science. Because scientists, by nature, are people who ask questions. They say why and when and how and stuff like that. So that science is the field where critical thinking should be introduced. So you'd say, well, is it? Well, if you actually look at it, and as I say, this is another whole program, there's a set of effectively national standards now in the United States called NGSS, Next Generation Science Standards. 45 states have officially voted to adopt these standards for K through 12. This has now been going on for over 10 years. And the phrase critical thinking doesn't even appear in these standards. Doesn't even appear. Much less is discussed. Doesn't even appear. And then I was looking further into these standards. Another thing I stumbled across was the phrase scientific method doesn't appear either.
Wow.
So these are science standards now. The phrase scientific method doesn't appear. So I did some further digging here. I'm good at that. And finally came across in their literature, appendices, whatever, they said I should say who they are. This is a group of progressives here. left-wing people here who wrote this all up here about 2012. So they say in their own writing that they decided to drop the scientific method because, here's the quote, it promotes linear thinking, unquote.
Wow.
Well, right. So the thing that really thrusts me is that this has been in effect now. These 45 states, by and large, are not teaching the scientific method. I researched and said there must be people objecting, teachers, parents, scientists, conservative organizations. No, I could hardly find anyone that has said boo about the fact that the science standards, K through 12, 45 states, have eliminated the scientific method. This is just, I'm just giving an example here of how profoundly bad it's gotten here because either people aren't paying attention or that they assume somebody else is taking care of it. So I decided to set an example here. Again, I'm trying to be brief here. And I took my state, North Carolina, which is now my home state. They're one of the 45 that signed in this. So after a few months of negotiating and complaining and objecting about this and put some PR pressure on them, I was all on my own. I tried to get some other conservative organizations to support me. They all said, John, what you're doing is great. We are in full support of what you're doing. I said, okay, would you get your members to write op-eds, for instance? No, I'm sorry, we can't do that. We got a lot of other things on our plate here, but keep up the good work. You're doing a great job. So I had no help whatsoever. But as of July of this year, the State Department of Education officially acknowledged that they were going to reverse their position on the scientific method and to start teaching it again. So,
wow, John, how exciting. Gosh.
Well, this is phenomenal. This is really extraordinary to get the entire state Department of Education to acknowledge that they were wrong and that they are now going to teach the scientific method again. This was extraordinary. We have a whole
I'm amazed. That is spectacular. Gosh,
it is. But anyways, so but I'm most concerned about this business about critical thinking. Yes. That's the umbrella over the whole thing. Because if we had more citizens that are critical thinkers, then a lot of this other baloney that they're being faced with here would be objected more strongly. Now, let me connect one other thing here again. This will be another program. Are you familiar with what's called SEL?
Only from your information to me. Please explain to everybody, SEL.
Okay, well, this has become the big thing now in the United States. SEL stands for Social Emotional Learning. You say, well, what the heck is that? Well, this is a phrase that's concocted by some academics. Basically, if you read what they say they're about, it all sounds really nice. They say things like, well, we're trying to make your children to be more self-aware, better decision makers, more socially conscious, stuff like this. That you can't really say any of those things are wrong, say that's a bad idea. So that in itself is what they're doing. They got five major things. So the question is, how are they doing this and who's doing this? So essentially what's happening is that they are going into schools who are buying into this to say, well, this will help your school to have less bullying, for instance, or your students to have better self-esteem, for instance, stuff like that. But again, these administrators say, great, I want that for my kids here. So this is done by, in my view here, left-leaning progressives here was the idea. So this SEL actually, again, I'm being brief here, this SEL is actually a delivery vehicle for left progressive ideology like CRT, critical race theory, DEI, diversity, equity, so forth, and woke ideologies. So in this sort of unassuming package of we're going to make your kids
more socially skilled. There you are. Doesn't that sound nice? More able to cope with society.
Yes, more mature, whatever. But that's really what they're trying to do is infuse these other progressive things here. So the left is very clever on these things. This is a Trojan horse, is what it would be. They market things in a way that sounds good, just like the Trojan horse looked good, but underneath the surface here, it's really bad. So one of the things that's really bad so I've written 2 articles, two Substack pieces about that, and I'm going to be doing a third one here in another week or so. One of the things that disturbs me particularly is that actually part of the SEL ideology is contrary to critical thinking. In other words, they are actually trying to promote groupthink, students doing what's politically correct, stuff like that. And that, of course, is completely contrary to what critical thinking is about. And of course, these progressives here have no interest in students being critical thinkers, because if they were, they would say a lot of the stuff that they're being told just doesn't add up. So, and that, by the way, that's what happened with the scientific method. And despite their stupid statement about it not being literal thinking promoter, the real reason for the scientific method being extracted is because when these technical ideas were proposed, let's say wind energy as an example, the automatic response to scientists would be to say, okay, let's subject you're saying we need to have wind energy to save the planet from climate change. That's your claim. So let's subject this idea here, this hypothesis, to scientific method. And so every time that happened, it failed. So these people got tired of having their ideas failing by the scientific method. So they had 2 choices. Either they could change their ideas, or they could get rid of the scientific method. So they chose the scientific method being attacked here. None of this is an accident. This is all very cleverly coordinated. Well, anyways, my pitch is that we really need to focus on critical thinking, because unless our schools are teaching critical thinking here, we're gone. You know what I mean?
And whilst you're talking about the US, John, it's almost the identical situation here in Australia. Sure. Almost identical. So critical thinking. So I absolutely take on board what you say. We're going to have to break shortly for a message, but you know, the question of the schools, whether people should send their children to these schools who teach in this way, or whether they should do homeschooling. And I really want to unpack that with you when we come back after the break. But I am interested in how do people find your Substack? What's the best way to find your Substack on critical thinking?
Well, I'm sure they can go to your website and you'll have a link to it. Duh.
Yes.
Okay. Another way would be to go to substack.com, which is the general organization, and just search for my name, John Droz. That'd be the 2 simplest ways here.
Good. Okay, everybody, please do that. Go to substack.com. I subscribe to many. I just want people to understand, because critical thinking, I'm a fan of critical thinking. I'm a fan of logic. And after we come back from a break, I'm with John Droz, who is in North Carolina. I'm Charles Kovess. This is the Mind Medicine program. And thank you for being on TNT Radio. We'll be back after these messages.
You're listening to Mind Medicine. Mind Medicine. Lighting the fuse for freedom. TNT Radio.
Welcome back. I'm with John Droz. I'm Charles Kovess. This is the Mind Medicine program, and we're talking about critical thinking and the question of homeschooling versus putting children through inadequate education systems. And John is indeed a critical thinker, a scientist. So, John, what do you recommend to parents in Australia and the US? And I'll declare my interest here that I had a great education. I was so lucky. I had mentors, and in Australia, the number of parents choosing homeschooling is increasing dramatically on the information that I have. What's your view on making that choice?
Okay, two backup things here. One is that I thought I had a very good education. It was a Catholic education, so I had nuns for grammar school. I had Zavarian brothers for high school and Jesuits for college, Boston College. Then I went off the reservation, Syracuse University, a public school. But I was very happy with my education. One of the reasons I'm concerned about this, one final point before we leave that, is that in the United States, there are approximately 4 million high school students graduated every year, and these people all become voting citizens. My estimate conservatively is that out of that 4 million, there's at least 3 million that are propagandized with nonsense here. So if we are adding to our citizen electorate 3 million uninformed or misinformed people every year, that's an intolerable development. That says that we have no chance eventually of ever electing intelligent representatives because the public has been purposely uneducated here. And I'm not an alarmist here, but the reality says that is exactly what's happened. Well, I'm telling you that things like 45 states have agreed to stop teaching the scientific method. I mean, hello, wake up. But that should tell you what I'm saying is not some exaggeration. Okay, as far as the education goes, in America, people have generally 4 options for sending their kids. One would be a public school. A second would be a private school, like a Catholic school. A third would be what's called a charter school. And a fourth would be homeschool. So what a lot of people are focusing on in conservative organization is called school choice in America. And they're saying that this is a big deal. So, for instance, groups like Heritage, who is probably the largest conservative organization in the United States, they say education is their number one concern. And so I talk to them, say, okay, what are you doing about the curriculum part? What's going on in science, for instance, or critical thinking. And they say, well, our focus is on school choice. We think that's more important. And I couldn't disagree with them more. I think that's an uninformed, misunderstood thing. And I think they're doing that for PR basis because people can understand the concept of school choice. But in reality, it's not a solution. So let me tell you why. Let's take North Carolina as an example, but it works the same way in every state in the United States. There is a state Department of Education, and who's over that is a state board of education. This board is anywhere from 12 to 20 people. They may be elected or appointed by the governor. Every state has their own little things there, but there's that number of people, let's say 16, 18 people who are calling the shots about the election program, K-12 election program in the state. Now, there's 3 main things they do. The first thing is that they are the ones who agree to and set the standards. So I was talking about the science standards here, for instance, that exclude the scientific method. So they're the ones that oversaw that and approved that. Now, I believe they did it, trying to be polite here, innocently. They didn't realize that was really what was in it, but they have the authority to set the standards. And that's how I got it fixed. I went back to them and made a big case here about this, and they said, oh my God, we never realized this. Again, another whole story. But anyway, so the 3 things that the State Board of Education does, state now, is approve standards for all subjects, for all grades. Second thing they do is they approve textbooks for all subjects, for all grades. Third thing they do is that they approve statewide tests for certification, et cetera, for all subjects, for all grades. So when somebody says, I'm going to move my kid from the public school and put it in the private school, they are still under the control of the State Board of Education. And they don't give that much thought. So in other words, the standards are the same for both schools. The textbooks, by and large, are the same for both schools. The tests, the state tests, are the same for both schools. And unfortunately, the same thing applies to homeschooling. You can always deviate from what the state is saying, just like that's one of their arguments to say, even in public school, well, a teacher doesn't have to follow everything we say. If they think the scientific method is a good thing, they can teach it. Well, that's baloney because number one, how many teachers are going to say, I'm going to go up against the State Board of Education here? Yeah, right. Second of all, how many teachers are going to be teaching from a book that excludes the scientific method? And they're going to say, well, pay no attention. They're saying to the students, pay no attention that the scientific method isn't in the book. I'm telling you about it. Well, why isn't it in the book? Well, never mind that. Forget that. And of course, it doesn't matter what they tell the kids here because the kids have to still pass these state tests. And if the state tests say there is no scientific method and they say otherwise, they're not going to do well on the test here. So the same thing applies for all four of these things here. So that's one of the things that I learned after researching this whole thing. And that's why I say this choice, school choice between one of these and another is a mirage here. It's not really solving the problem. Yes, you will maybe get better teachers by going to a private school versus the public school, but in a way that could actually be bad because if the state standards are the same thing. So for instance, if the state is teaching climate change and you have a public school teacher who's so-so, but you go to a private school teacher who's very aggressive and they indoctrinate your kid more about climate change than they would have been indoctrinated by a non-paying attention public school, you're actually worse off. So anyways, this could be another whole show here. But the bottom line is what needs to be paid attention to is the curriculum, and particularly, in my view, the science curriculum, because that's where a lot of the progressive ideologies have been implemented. But that's another whole topic.
Well, let's take that issue because here's my proposition to you. Parents need to take an interest because you are saying, hey, there's not much difference what you do because of the curriculum imposed by the state. So the parents need to take an interest in what's being taught to their children. However, in both Australia and America, there's been, and in the UK, there is a clear strategy to hollow out the middle class so that both parents have to work. So in fact, John, most families are now dual working parents, so the parents haven't got the time when the child comes back from school to say, what was school like today? Well, they were teaching us all about this transgender crap, and the parents don't have time because they have to work to enable their family to survive. And I think, this is a real problem of what you're saying. And I think you raising the awareness of this to our listeners, I see as being crucial because it's my experience that, and I've coached many senior executives, if their children are doing well, their mental health, both parents, is much better than if their children are significantly struggling. So come back to this question of of mental health, John, because I'm impressed with you. By the way, I was taught by Maris brothers, and my mentor was a Jesuit priest, and my son went to a Xaverian school here in Melbourne. So I've got five children, but I've had a big Jesuit influence. Now, of course, some people talk about that's a whole show in itself, the Jesuits. But the benefit clearly for you and me was we both consider we had good educations and are able to think critically. So
I think that's the key thing, Charles, right there. That is the key thing.
Yeah, and I love that model. I'm going to embrace that idea to say, hey, look, have this ability to think critically. So we've only got less than 10 minutes to go. John, can you give us a sense?
Can I make one other objection here, Charles? Since you said I wouldn't object to anything, I would like to make one other objection that relates to this. Well, on one of your prior shows, you talked about the importance of, I think the word you used was intuitive wisdom. Right?
Correct.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
In my view, I think that is, maybe I don't understand what that means, but intuition ordinarily is something that's inbred, let's say, that's instinctive, whatever. No,
instinctive, but not inbred. Oh, sorry, inbred. It had to be what you mean by the word inbred. Yes, intuitive wisdom. Keep going.
And yes, innate. I think what the question is here is that critical thinking is something that is actually taught. And that's an important distinction to say, well, let's rely on, again, I'm simplifying what you said here, intuition versus critical thinking. I think the two are in somewhat of a contrast. I mean, there's an overlap there, but I think the more important thing is this critical thinking part here. But that is something that we may have always had the interest for knowledge, but we don't know how to critically think here. And so that is necessarily something that has to be taught, whereas intuitive wisdom doesn't sound like that's so teachable. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it. Maybe we have
I think with respect, you are misunderstanding it, and it's far more powerful than you. And I would put intuitive wisdom ahead of critical thinking. You need in critical thinking to implement the insights and the genius that God gives us through intuitive wisdom. But we'll have another conversation around that, because it's a nice balance between soul and mind. Can you give? We've only got 5 minutes to go. Can you give our listeners a sense of the breadth of your work and how they access your genius? I've already mentioned c19science.info. Give us a taste. Should they subscribe to Media Balanced newsletter? Come on.
Well, that's the most general thing. That comes out every 2 weeks, and I cover all the major topics here in ways that aren't available in the media otherwise. And so that would be the number one thing to do. The number two thing would be to subscribe to this Substack. And you brought this up in the beginning here. This FDA case here is extraordinarily important, because in my view, what's being attacked is a legal foundation that is suspect, that gives these federal agencies basically a free rein. And that's exactly what these people are saying, that they have a free rein to do whatever they want to do, and there's no recourse other than electing a different president or something like that here. Well, that, of course, is preposterous, since that only happens every 4 years or so. So what's going on in that case here has profound significance, and so far they're winning. Which is a good thing. So an appeal verdict was in their favor on Friday, because a lower court denied their claims against the FDA. And so they appealed it, and this appeal court really ripped into the FDA. And the FDA lawyer made all sorts of statements that were preposterous, like the FDA has the right to give citizens medical advice. So think about this. A federal agency has the right to give an individual citizen medical advice where they have no knowledge whatsoever of this citizen's medical condition or anything else. They have a right to do that. Well, the judge didn't accept that. Then they criticized them highly for that. So what they said here, what they got on record here was pretty profound. So I'm very hopeful that could result in some positive changes here, because that's really what needs to be done on some of these federal agencies. They need to have some meaningful oversight, and right now there's essentially almost no meaningful oversight. So they can go to my Substack and read the details about this. But that's why this to you.
Yeah, well, John, we've got 2 minutes. We've got 2 minutes to go. What do you give us? One clue that you do that keeps you healthy. Mentally, physically, spiritually healthy. Give us you're a scientist, great. So what have you decided for you?
Well, I think a lot of health is to do with balance. I think it has a lot to do with. I'm a big believer in variety is the spice of life. So I purposefully take time out, even though I'm in very stressful situations. A lot of people are not happy with what I'm saying. So I purposely take time out every week to do things like play golf, as an example, because this is, it's a completely different mindset, and I can get away from these other things here and then come back sort of refreshed on that. But variety is the spice. I have a variety of other interests. I have, I like playing bridge as an example. So that's a mental exercise. Almost every day I go for a bike ride for like a half an hour at the end of the day. And my wife has been very good about having a healthy diet, things of that nature.
Very good. All right, we're running out of time, but that's a very important idea you've given to us. You have the courage to speak what's true for you. And everybody, that's what TNT Radio is about. We must speak up. If we are cowed into silence because we're not willing to face criticism or rejection, we will lose the battle for freedom. John Droz, thank you so much for being with us on the program. That's D-R-O-Z. Look him up on Substack. Have a look at his websites. John, we will have you back as soon as possible. Congratulations on your magnificent journey in life. And thank you for listening to TNT Radio, everybody. Be with you next week. Bye.